Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA, episode 118 for the week ending August 31, 2018, the end of summer edition. First, a word from our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors. Founded in 2004, Affiliated Monitors provides professional, independent integrity monitoring and ethics and compliance assessments nationally and internationally and across almost all industries. With its knowledge of effective ethics and compliance programs and cultures, Affiliated Monitors is respected for its work as the corporate monitor on matters ranging from multinational corporations to small and mid-sized companies, and even individuals. Having served in over 700 monitorships, no one has more experience as an independent monitor than the team at Affiliated Monitors. For more information on how an independent monitor can help your company improve your company's ethics and compliance programs, visit our sponsor's website, Affiliated Monitors, at www.affiliatedmonitors.com. In a wide-ranging exploration of many compliance and ethics issues today, Jay and I take a look at the Hoskins decision. The 1MDB scandal only gets weirder. The conclusion of the Legg Mason FCPA enforcement action. Some lessons learned via Jacqueline Jaeger on the Wynn scandal. Integrity was a big part of the week. I wrote about it in the context of John McCain. Nelson Pratt wrote about it on the Navix Ethics and Compliance Matters blog. Caterina Bulgarera explains why power is going to be an issue for leadership. Microsoft is potentially in trouble for its distributor network. We take a look at the risks of distributors under the FCPA. We take a look at the Cleveland Browns, the hapless Cleveland Browns, I should say, whose linebacker Michael Kendricks was indicted and apparently pled guilty for insider trading. We ask once again, who's the worst run organization in professional sports? And then once again, it's apparently the Cleveland Browns. We do a wrap up of my 1 week podcast series on the intersection of King Arthur and compliance. We take a look at the playoff races, and we end with some words about my upcoming master class in Boston. This is Tom Fox. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, back again for another episode of This Week in FCPA, episode 118 for the week ending August 31, 2018, the end of summer edition. As always, I'm joined by Mr. Monitors himself, Jay Rosen. Jay, welcome.
Tom, happy last weekend of summer.
So with the Labor Day upon us, Jay, you can put away your white linen suits and your seersucker suits as well. Certainly in Houston with that nip of fall in the air. We're upon the unofficial end of summer days, not the end of days, the end of summer days with the Labor Day weekend. So we've had a really interesting week, I think, on the compliance and ethics front. You want to just hop right into it?
Let's do it. Why don't you tell us about last week's ruling from the Second Circuit about the Hoskins matter?
So Hoskins is a former employee of Alstom who was under criminal indictment in the United States for his role in Alstom's bribery scandal. Alstom basically pled out and admitted to the bribery and corruption. And the Department of Justice went after 4 individuals, 2 of which have pled guilty and 2 of which were contesting this at trial. Hoskins, UK citizen, claimed that he never worked in the United States and therefore was not subject to jurisdiction in the United States because he never worked for a U.S. company or a U.S. subsidiary. He worked for a foreign subsidiary of Alstom. Of course, at the time, Alstom was a French-based company. And he was able to persuade the district court to throw out the claims against him, and he was successful in part at the Second Circuit. The Second Circuit held that as a foreigner working for a foreign company or a foreign subsidiary not in the United States, he was not subject to the FCPA. So some of the takeaways are that there was really a narrow impact for foreign nationals because although the Second Circuit certainly limited the FCPA's extraterritorial reach somewhat, it left open the door for conspiracy claims against a non-resident foreign national as long as the government also establishes the foreign national as an agent of an issuer or domestic corporation. So the question becomes, or the focus will become, what is an agent and what is agency? So left unanswered by this decision is whether, in fact, Hoskins was an agent of Alstom's U.S. subsidiary. It's not clear under what law agency will be defined, whether it be the state where the claim was brought, whether it be some sort of U.S. common law on agency. So that's really an open question. There is a potential implication for foreign joint venture partners where the U.S. government's ability to reach the conduct of such foreign companies that enter into joint ventures with the United States may be somewhat lessened. And of course, we should never forget, Jay, that there's an individual here, Mr. Hoskins. So it remains to be seen what the government will do, if they'll ask the Supreme Court for an appeal, whether they will ask for a rehearing on bonk, meaning before all of the justices of the Second Circuit, or judges, I should say. It's not clear what the U.S. would do in terms of prosecuting Hoskins going forward. But because it is a Court of Appeals case involving the FCPA, those are extraordinarily rare. So it is of some significance and something that we'll have to see where the Department of Justice may go forward with it going forward.
So being the non-lawyer that I am, in the past, it's always been about trying to establish nexus with the transaction, that there was a wire coming through the U.S. or there was a payment or something. So does this really, is this really more of an individual prosecution, or does this mean that the DOJ needs to do more now to prove their cases?
So I really think it's the former, Jay, because it's an individual. In the Alstom case, you did have conduct in the United States. You had jurisdiction in the United States, which implicated Alstom as a company. So that was not the issue. The issue was Mr. Hoskins working for one of Alstom's subsidiaries, I believe the Indonesian subsidiary. And so, but the question becomes, is that person an agent? And the question I would have is, did the U.S. company or did the issuer, did they accept the money? Did they accept the proceeds of the bribery and corruption? And if they did, that may be enough. I think that really the legal parameters of agency are different for every state, as are many common law interpretations in the United States, even statutory. So we're going to have to figure out that agency question going forward. Jay, next we had, I thought, an interesting article by Hui Chen. Everything she does, I think, is interesting. But she really, I thought, channeled a Dwight Eisenhower here, and because she wrote an article about compliance not being a outcome, but really a process. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so this is something that we picked up from Hui. It was published this week on the Bloomberg site. And she talks about that, you know, if you were going into the hospital for an operation, would you want to go to the hospital where they have a 95% chance of cleaning their hands and being hygienic, or would you rather go to the place that has 100% outcomes that their patients survive these surgeries? So Hui, for a very long time, has always been focused on how do you measure compliance and what are the right things to measure. And in this article, she talked about that sometimes the focus is on the process and not the outcome, and whether that process can give you KPIs that you can measure that, I guess, to be proverbial, you're missing the trees through the forest. So she says, you know, there are some areas such as tone at the top, and that you should be looking at the messaging coming from the top leaders in your organization. You should measure training through behavior and not entertainment. So just because somebody loves to look at that cute little animated ethics and compliance commercial that you put on, if they're entertained but they're not taking the right action, you're again barking up the wrong tree. And the last thing is to talk about, she talks about measuring controls as filters. And again, if people are getting past the filters or figuring out ways to go around, they may not be achieving the outcomes that they're looking to do. So it's a great article, and we post to it in the show notes. And as you said, Hui usually has something interesting on her mind.
So Jay, next we have the continuing saga of 1MDB. And I can only say that sometimes you have to channel your, before we get to that, I want to explain my reference to Dwight Eisenhower, Jay. When Jack Kennedy, or President Kennedy, I should say, asked General Eisenhower for advice around the Cuban Missile Crisis, Eisenhower responded with, what was your process? What was the process by which you came to your decision? And he was more interested in the process than the end resulting decision. And what Eisenhower came across to Kennedy was, it's the robustness of your process. And that was really my nod to Eisenhower, because I think Hui Chen is absolutely right. It's process, not really the outcome. But next up, we have the case that keeps on giving, 1MDB. And here I'm going to have to channel my inner Hunter S. Thompson. When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro, because this is only getting weirder. So first we had certain arrests in the Malaysian Foreign Intelligence Service for theft of government monies around the 1MDB scandal. And then in a really, as a recovering screenwriter, I would have to say, Jay, if you wrote this in a movie, no one would believe it because it's simply too weird. Is that now we have Chris Christie drug into this scandal as one of the lawyers for the Malaysian businessman, Jho Low, who's at the center of the scandal. And Christie is one of the lawyers representing him in a civil forfeiture action in the United States. So this thing is just unbelievable, touching all here and fro, to and fro, further and yonder, and it just seems to never be ending.
You actually get a Trump 2-for-1 because his former outside counsel, Mark Kasowitz, is also involved. So it's definitely a very swampy matter, I think.
That it is. So we had the Legg Mason matter finally, FCPA matter finally ending with a cease and desist order from the Securities and Exchange Commission. You want to tell us about that?
Yep. So this came up a couple, I think, months ago, and it was about a relationship that Legg Mason had in a joint venture with Societe Generale, or SocGen, and it was about them bribing officials in Libya, if you can believe that. As part of the penalty, Legg Mason got an NPA out of it and agreed to pay $64.2 million to the Justice Department. And you chose to write about this this week when you had a nice remembrance of Ed King from Leonard Skinner. And you talked about how, again, the Justice Department and the SEC are incentivizing companies to come forward. And Legg Mason got an especially good deal. They got a 25% discount off the low end of the sentencing guidelines, and they also benefited from the recent piling on policy that they had a large part of their disgorgement that was already paid was credited against what they ultimately owned to the SEC. So as we've seen this year, the government is still doing a very good job of trying to incentivize companies to come forward. And I think, Legg Mason benefited from this. And I think it's starting to make the calculus clear. And hopefully this helps companies with deciding that decision on whether or not to go forward and self-report. Next up, Tom, we're going to take a look at the wind scandal and our colleague Jacqueline Jaeger over at Compliance Week. So what's Jacqueline thinking about?
So Jacqueline wrote just a awesome piece on lessons learned from Wynn Resort's sexual harassment scandal. And it's going to be very prominently featured in the next Compliance Week magazine. It's really just an excellent piece. I can't commend it enough to everyone. But she takes a look at the background facts and then really, I think, provides some important lessons for corporations going forward that expand far beyond the Me Too movement or sexual harassment. Number one, don't sweep allegations under the rug. Remember, Wynn and Wynn Resorts have consistently denied anything was askance, while in the face of paying $7.5 million to one claimant. And when you pay that kind of money, it's seriously bad. What about at the board? What's the role of the board? So do you have a separate role for the board chairman and the CEO? That was not present at Wynn. And it's maybe something you should consider. Also, do you have independent board members? What about, the very basic, Jay? Do you have a compliance officer? And then don't ignore broader compliance and legal risks. If you recall, or perhaps should just note that HR at Wynn Casinos was there to protect Steve Wynn and harass people that make complaints. That's not the accepted role of HR. And certainly the amount of money paid out for settlements and money to keep people quiet is not an appropriate role of HR. So consider some of the broader legal risks, which is an excellent article by Jacqueline and has a lot of implications and applications outside Me Too and sexual harassment.
So I'd like to jump off the list for a sec. This thought just popped into my mind, and was wondering if we could spend a couple moments. In the article that Jacqueline wrote, she said that I guess Wynn had hushed up a sexual harassment thing, and they paid $7.5 million for an NDA. And I want to just step back for a sec. With everything that's happening in the news, on day-to-day basis, we sign NDAs all the time, but we sign them from a perspective that we might be doing business, and anything that we learn about the business that we're working with is confidential information that needs to be held as such. But now you have NDAs which really are obfuscating what has happened in different situations, and the public does not know about any of these things. And sometimes they can potentially lead to shareholder suits, or sometimes they can potentially lead to personal harm in the Me Too context. So when have NDAs always had these dual purposes, or why do we see such nefarious ones being talked about at the same time when we have things that have to happen in terms of confidentially from just regular business procedures?
So one of the things about settlement of civil matters, civil litigation, civil claims, civil disputes, is that the settlements are almost always confidential. And that has been in practice since at least the time I began practicing law in 1983. So this is something that's been of long-standing tradition. Basically, if you settle, if you're paying the money, you don't want anyone else to know how much money you paid. As to the person who received money, that I don't know the answer to, because I was always on the payor end, not the payee end. But that's something that was traditionally required. And the type of NDA you described, Jay, is much more commercially focused, I think, so that there would not be a revelation of confidential business information. But somehow or another, the confidential information in NDAs for settlement of civil litigation, including sexual harassment and Me Too claims, became weaponized. And it was used to prevent people from talking about it. But the impact, the perhaps unintended consequence, was that many corporations didn't have the full picture. So a board of directors, for instance, might not have a full picture unless they approved all of the settlements for sexual harassment. Senior management, anyone outside of HR might not know about it, or conversely, someone outside the legal department may not know about it. So it really was turned out to be, I think, a very negative consequence for both corporations that were engaging in the conduct, and then certainly for the people who couldn't talk about it and couldn't bring their stories forward. And now, because of, I think, the invidiousness that sexual harassment is viewed, that the propensity to enforce these NDAs has dropped quite a bit, and it's viewed not in the public interest to hide this information behind an NDA going forward.
So, Tom, I guess what we might see is, I guess, a new category of a civil settlement, but when it's something that's egregious as egregious as sexual harassment, at that point, maybe you have the agreement, but you are no longer able to have the NDA.
I think that's the direction we're heading.
Yeah. So to get us back on schedule and track, we've got an article by Nelson Pratt that comes to us via Navex, and it's talking about making integrity part of your brand. And in this article, he says that there's really three places where you can do that. And one is that we always talk about tone from the top, and culture in turn is determined and reinforced by senior leadership. Another thing is words, and what the words that we always talk about are your code of conduct, and not only should you have it, but you should make it public, you should put it on your website, you should make it available for all employees and potential partners to see. And the last part is your deeds, and actions always speak louder than words, and you need to make your workplace have a culture that is hostile to those who lack integrity. And this means you want to encourage employees to speak up if they have a problem, and then you want them to take reporting seriously. And finally, you have to have corrective action. So, these are real, I would say, benchmarks and really core ideas about how you have integrity. And if you do this, you run a great business for your partners. And what kind of set Nelson off to think about these things is E&Y recently did a 15th global fraud survey, and this got Nelson thinking about how you can make integrity part of your brand. Next up, Tom, you had a great blog piece with your remembrances and a farewell to John McCain, and how that speaks to integrity within your organization.
Right. I think a lot of people have been thinking about integrity with the passing of John McCain, certainly in contrast to the current administration and their complete lack of integrity. And so I felt like it was important to honor Senator McCain and around integrity. So we recorded a Everything Compliance podcast a little bit earlier today, and both Matt and Mike Volkov both spoke eloquently about you and Mike, I'm sorry, spoke pretty eloquently about Senator McCain. So I think a lot of people have been thinking about integrity this week beyond simply the ethics and compliance community.
There was a specific Harvard Business Review article. Was there anything you wanted to share from that? Sure.
So really the authors had 5 different areas that you could that they'd identified as important areas for corporate integrity. 1, that management takes action when it becomes aware of misconduct. 2, that employees are comfortable speaking up about misconduct and don't fear retaliation. 3, senior leaders and managers treat employees with respect. 4, managers hold employees accountable. And 5, that there's a high level of trust among colleagues. So if you've got those things, that hopefully that will lead to some of the things Nelson talked about and positive responses in the next EY survey about integrity.
Great. So next up, I've got an article written by Katerina Bulgarella. Hope I didn't butcher that too much. And it's about power changes you, and that can make or break your ability to lead. And she really talks about 2 different kind of dynamics that happen from people who are in leadership positions. And they can either feel entitled because they're in leadership and they do whatever they want to do. And I'm sure we have many examples of that in our daily newscasts. But then there are other folks who are able to use their leadership and their power to delegate and to actually, serve as a sounding board and allowing them to leverage their employees and to take that power and spread it throughout the organization and make it more effective. So they're really just, she says that power is a currency that all leaders have, but is also one of the most misunderstood assets in leadership. And how leaders relate to power and their beliefs about effective leadership are two hidden factors that shape the ability for them to maintain an ethical focus while guiding businesses through continued change and growth. So within the article, she talks about Salesforce, and she also talks about Microsoft, and again, how these two different leaders are looking at leadership. So basically, ascending to the full meaning of leadership, the leaders must explore their inner space and figure out how what they do affects everyone else within the organization. They should create norms of personal accountability and responsibility, and then they should acknowledge the power of others. So it's a real great read, and we definitely link to that in the show notes. And next up, Tom, we've got an article from Dick Casson at the FCPA blog and talking about Microsoft matter in Hungary. What's the issue there?
So, Jay, this is a matter where apparently, it's unclear if Microsoft self-disclosed, but appears that they're looking at some potential bribery and corruption in Hungary and perhaps other countries in Eastern Europe. But the issue is really distributors. And the distributor sales model is one that is very common in the hardware and software industry, in addition to commissioned sales agents. But here it's distributors. And I think for those who might not know the difference, distributors actually purchase product. They take title and risk of loss to a piece of product, whether that be software, whether that be a valve or anything in between, and then they're responsible for selling it. Now they get a discount off the purchase price, and then they can resell it either at a specified price or up to a specified price or whatever they can get for it. And that spread, that delta, that difference between what they pay for it and what they sell it is their profit. If it's an extraordinary amount of profit, obviously this could be a situation where that sales price could generate a pot of money that could be utilized to pay a bribe. So distributors are covered under the FCPA. We've had specific cases around this, and it's going to be interesting to watch this one go forward. Really, Jay, because of this unique sales model of the distributorship as opposed to a commissioned sales agent.
And that gave you a jumping off point for a blog that you wrote on the 28th this week about 3 steps for managing the FCPA risk of a distributor. And that is it in this week's edition of Compliance Week or next week's?
It's actually in this week. It's up on the website now. And I want to cite to a guy, Jay, Bill Athanas. And I can't remember how many years ago Bill wrote this article, but he wrote an article specifically addressing this issue, addressing the issue of distributors under the FCPA, addressing the issue of how distributor risk could be managed. And he came up with something called a discount authorization request, which is once again, to channel our inner Hui Chen, a process, not an outcome, but it's a process by which a distributor asks for a discount, and then you, as the seller, determine an appropriate level of discount. It's Bill lays it out, how you document it, how you have a process for it, how you have oversight and review of it, and how you track it, and then how you store that information or document. So I cite to Bill, I cite to his article. It's a good way for you to think through what the risk is and how you can try to manage that risk going forward on a strategic basis.
Great. So now we have an intersection of sports and compliance and a team that just can't do anything right called the Cleveland Browns. What happened here?
If there was ever the gang that couldn't shoot straight, this is a team that's gone 1-31 over the past two seasons, and it's unclear whether they're better or worse this year. They are incredibly poorly run. They are incredibly poorly managed. They're incredibly poorly coached. I will not fault the players because I think they're giving everything they've got. But they had a situation where a linebacker, Michael Kendricks, has been indicted for insider trading and indeed has pled guilty to insider trading. So the question is, what do the Browns know and when do they know it? Well, it looks like they found out about it when the press conference announcing the guilty plea. So you have to wonder what kind of due diligence that the Browns did, why they would bring someone in who was obviously under investigation. Not that that's an indicia that you're going to be found guilty, but you might not want to sign somebody, or you might want to put them on suspension, or you might want to do something different. But if there's one, I would have to say, certainly in pro football, they're the worst run organization. The New York Knicks are probably up there with them in basketball. And I'll leave that the baseball one open at this point. But certainly one of the worst run organizations, just a black eye for the Cleveland Browns again. That once again shows why you need to do substantive and substantial and thorough due diligence if you're going to pay someone multi-millions of dollars, whether it's to play football or whether it's to run your company. You really need to know if they're going to be under criminal indictment, Jay.
So did you love the way they had coded discussions about how much money they should put in the account? And I guess is Kendricks what is he? He's a linebacker, right?
Right.
So at one point they're talking and he says, "Yo, so the 80 is there," and then the response back is, "Nah, you should keep number 95." So to us, quant geeks who watch football, we would know that 80 is a number for a wide receiver, whereas 95 would be more of a linebacker or defensive numbers. So that was my little bit of minutia there. This week, Tom, you've been celebrating your 1,000th podcast. And as part of your celebration, you've done different 5-part podcasts. And this week you decided to take a look at the Arthurian legend. So what kind of compliance lessons are you pulling from King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table?
So, Joe, you're absolutely right. In the land of 1,000 podcasts, I ended this month with a series on the intersection of King Arthur and compliance. So on part 1, it was Arthurian leadership. Part 2, the Pentecostal oath and your code of conduct. Part 3 was the King Arthur's Round Table and whistleblowing. Part 4 is a lesser-known character in the Arthurian legend, the Green Knight, and whistleblower protection. And I ended it today with a consideration of the quest for the Holy Grail and request for a compliance defense to be appended on to the FCPA, and why, at the end of the day, not only they are both quixotic, but they will both never occur. So it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed putting on these additional podcasts this month. It really drove my numbers through the roof. And of course, now the question is, do I continue at this frantic pace? But certainly this month was a lot of fun.
Well, it's been a lot of fun listening to them and participating in some of them. What is happening in the fall in the Tom Fox world?
So as probably most people know, fall is the conference season. But before we get so conference-wise, actually, I'm scheduled to speak Tuesday, September 4th, to the Austin chapter of the ACFE, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. I'm going to talk about the indicia of fraud and anti-corruption compliance prevention and detection. And then I'm most excited about an event I'm doing with Affiliated Monitors, Jay. At the end of September, on the 25th and 26th, I'm going to come up to Boston and put on a compliance masterclass training. It's a 2-day event. It will be held at the offices of affiliated monitors. I've got information on the event on my website, and you can check it out there. You can register on the website. We're going to link to it in the show notes. And I hope that if you're in the Boston area, you will sign up for what I think is one of the top compliance master classes around.
Great. And then moving into October, I understand you'll be going to Denver. What's happening out there?
So in Denver, from 8th through 10th, Conversant is putting on Converge 18. It is their annual conference. So I'm going to be participating there in a roundtable. And actually, Mike Volkov and I are leading a breakout session on key performance indicators for your compliance program. So I'm very excited to be able to work with Mike on that presentation, and looking forward to being at Converge 18.
Yeah, there's a lot of great folks. We'll also link there. You can see who the other fellow speakers are. My colleague Eric Feldman will be there, and he has a really great presentation on perverse incentives. And also Hui Chen is going to be speaking, so that's great. And then from Converge 18, we finally make our way to our highlight of the SCCE year, which is the Compliance and Ethics Institute. It will be held in Vegas again at Caesar's Palace, and I believe the dates are, is that October 21 through 24? Does that sound right?
It does.
And then after that, we coast into the holidays and all those muffin baskets and boxes of candy that come into this week in FCPA. So I'm just looking forward to it.
All right, Jay. Well, let me just end with congratulations for your Red Sox. You're back up to 8.5 games. It looks like the August swoon where every Red Sox fan feared the ghost of Bucky Dent was catching them is not going to happen. You got an 8.5 game lead over the Yankees with 30 days. I don't think even the Red Sox can blow that one.
There you go. All right, you put it out there. Thank you, Tom.
You want to take us home?
Well, yeah, I'll take us home, but I guess next week we have to have the Houston, New England wager about who's going to win the opening game of the NFL season, right?
Well, as significant as that may or may not be, let me just let you know that from September 7 through 9, the Houston Astros will be in Fenway Park.
Wow, there's going to be a lot on the line next week.
A lot. Especially for this week in FCPA.
Yes. So on behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitors, we'd like to thank you for joining us for this week in FCPA, episode 118, for the week ending August 31st, 2018, the end of summer edition. So put away that seersucker in your white suit and break out those plaid shirts, because it's football, and for right now, it looks like baseball playoff season for the Astros and the Red Sox. Thanks a lot. Have a great and safe Labor Day weekend.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you have any questions, you can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. You can email me, Tom Fox, at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thanks again for listening to this episode, and I hope you'll join us again next week when Jay and I take a look at some of the week's top compliance and ethics stories. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.